Smoke. That's how it always begins, with smoke. The kind that crawls low across a battlefield, hiding the fallen and softening the sound of dying empires. Through it, a shadow moves, small, sharp, and deliberate. The soldiers whisper his name like a spell. To some, he is salvation. To others, a curse that walks upright. Napoleon. We've all heard the story, haven't we? The little man who wanted to rule the world. The tyrant who drowned Europe in blood. The mad conqueror who dreamed of empire and woke to exile. But what if none of that was quite true? What if the man beneath the hat, the myth, and the marble statues was something entirely different? For 2 centuries, history has painted him as both monster and miracle, a genius, a devil, a god in uniform. But history, like art, depends on who holds the brush. And when empires fall, it's the victors who write the captions. The truth is stranger and far more human. Imagine standing in the cold dawn of 1805 at Austerlitz, the fog lifting like a curtain over a stage, set for eternity. 2 mighty armies face one another, Russian and Austrian banners rippling in the wind, and in the center a single man watches silently from horseback, eyes narrowed as if calculating the fate of the world. He does not shout, he does not tremble, he simply waits for the sun. That man, so often mocked as small, towers above every king who came to destroy him. And yet the story we were given shrinks him. Why? Because sometimes it's easier to defeat a legend on paper than on the battlefield. Sometimes, to make the world feel safe again, you must turn a man into a monster. We'll unmask 5 of the greatest lies ever told about Napoleon Bonaparte, the myths that reshaped his life, his death, and his legacy. We'll peel away the propaganda, the politics, and the fear until only the human remains. The truth is not what you think. It never is. Because every empire, even the one built from memory, hides its foundations in shadow. And this time, we're going to step inside the smoke and see what history tried to make us forget. The year is 1793. France is bleeding from the inside out. The revolution has devoured its kings, and now it's devouring its children. Paris smells of gunpowder and fear. The guillotine works without rest, its blade shining like a promise no one asked for. The Republic is young, fragile, and surrounded by enemies who want to see it strangled in its cradle. And in the midst of this chaos, in the smoke, in the shouting, stands a quiet Corsican officer, a man too proud for his rank, too ambitious for his world. Napoleon Bonaparte. He is 24 years old, pale, and unreadable, a man who carries silence like a weapon. His French is thick with the accent of the island he left behind, and the Parisian elite mock him for it. To them, he's an outsider, provincial, strange, not quite one of them. But when the cannons thunder at Toulon, the young man's mind turns the chaos into geometry. He sees not battle, but possibility. Under his command, the city falls. France takes notice. A general is born, not through birthright, but brilliance. Before Napoleon, Europe was a stage of inherited crowns, kings who ruled by bloodline, not merit. But he changed that script. For the first time, ordinary soldiers saw that genius could rise from nowhere. That destiny could wear a common face, and when he looked at them, truly looked, they believed him. From that moment, his rise feels unnatural. He moves too quickly, too perfectly. Italy, Egypt, Marengo. Each campaign another stanza in the poem of his ascent. Soldiers begin calling him the Little Corporal, not out of mockery but affection. And yet, a whisper starts to follow him. A small, sharp rumor carried across the channel by British lips. He's tiny, you know, barely a man at all. A child in a general's coat. The newspapers run with it. Cartoons of a miniature emperor barking orders, standing on stools to reach his maps. The image spreads faster than any bullet he's ever fired. But the truth? Napoleon was of average height, around 5'6", tall enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with most men of his age. The lie began as propaganda, a joke, a jab, and became a legend. Because the world needed him to be small. It made his victories less terrifying, his defeats more satisfying. Between battles, he wrote endless letters to Josephine. Not orders, not decrees, but confessions. He missed her perfume, the warmth of her laughter, the smell of Corsican pine. In those pages, the conqueror disappeared, and a lonely man emerged, afraid of being forgotten even as the world chanted his name. By 1804, the myth was complete. The world saw not the man, but the mask, stitched together from equal parts fear and fascination. A genius, a tyrant, a god, a fraud. And somewhere in the distance, across that narrow strip of water called the Channel, men in London were already drawing their next cartoon, their next story, their next lie. One that would not only define the man, but destroy him. Because when truth and power collide, it's never the facts that survive. It's the fiction that feels right. The second lie. Napoleon was a bloodthirsty tyrant. Drums, always the drums. They beat like the heart of an empire that refuses to sleep. Echoing through the misted fields of Europe, from Madrid to Moscow, the rhythm of revolution turned conquest. By now, Napoleon is no longer just a man. He is a system, a storm, a symbol that cannot stand still. He speaks of peace, but his armies march on. He dreams of order, but the world bleeds around him. The crowned heads of Europe whisper a new word: tyrant. It tastes bitter in their mouths, but it serves them well. Because if Napoleon is a monster, then their crusade against him is not vengeance, it is virtue. They call him bloodthirsty, but they forget who struck first. Picture Europe before him, a continent ruled by the accident of birth. Nobles fat on inheritance, peasants bound to soil. Napoleon's empire, for all its cruelty, was built on a radical dream: that a man's worth might come from his talent, not his title. He writes laws instead of poetry, the Napoleonic Code binding France in words more permanent than steel. He abolishes feudal privilege, grants freedom of religion, rebuilds education, and forces equality before the law. He believes, truly, that he is saving Europe from itself. But ideals are fragile when held in a conqueror's hand. Meanwhile, far from the cannon fire, another kind of war brews, the continental system. Napoleon's grand attempt to strangle Britain through economics. No ships, no trade, no access to the ports of Europe. An empire enforced not with bullets, but with blockades. It nearly works, until hunger and greed prove stronger than loyalty. Smugglers, merchants, even his own allies, all cheat the system, and slowly his dream of total control begins to rot from within. Now see him, midnight in a tent outside Vienna. The map before him is scarred with pins and candle wax. The air smells of smoke and wet earth. He stares not at nations, but at patterns, rivers, roads, numbers. Somewhere out there, tens of thousands wait for his next command. He hesitates, just for a breath, and in that silence, the lie begins to grow. When dawn comes, the fields turn red, the cannons roar, and Europe trembles again. To those who watch from afar, it is madness, one man feeding on the lives of millions. But to those who march behind him, it feels like destiny. A soldier once said, "He looked at you as if you were worth something, even if the world had told you you weren't." That, perhaps, was the real danger of Napoleon. Not that he sought power, but that he made others believe they could reach it too. The wars multiply. Spain burns. Prussia kneels. Austria falters. Each victory feels less like triumph and more like hunger. And still, the drums. They echo through ruined cathedrals, down frozen valleys, across bridges of shattered stone. Behind every step, the ghosts of the revolution walk beside him, whispering the promises he once made and the ones he can no longer keep. He is called emperor now, but the crown fits like a chain. The higher he rises, the smaller the world becomes. Allies vanish, enemies multiply. He stares across the Channel toward England, that eternal island of defiance. He dreams of crossing it, of ending the story where it began. But fate and the sea refuse him, and so he turns east. toward Russia. Summer, 1812. The sun burns white over an endless plain. 600,000 men march under the eagle, the greatest army Europe has ever seen. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and prophecy. Every step forward feels irreversible. The soldiers sing, the officers laugh. Even Napoleon believes the gods are watching. But somewhere in that great silence between heartbeats, history leans forward and begins to sharpen its knife. The fires of Moscow will soon light the sky, the snow will fall, and the same drums that once beat for glory will echo through frozen bones. The man who once gave law to nations will soon be swallowed by his own legend, and the world, watching from the warmth of their thrones, will smile and whisper, "See, the tyrant has met his end." But they will be wrong again. Because the tyrant they invented was never the man who walked into Russia. He was still chasing something purer, something the world would not forgive him for. Not power, not glory, but control. Control over the chaos that had once created him, and that, more than any war, would be the beginning of his undoing. The wind over Moscow carries no victory, only ashes. Napoleon rides through the ruins, streets once filled with music now reduced to embers and bone. The sky is bruised with smoke, the air thick with the smell of burned grain and frozen flesh. He had come seeking triumph, and found an empty city set ablaze by its own people. For the first time, there is no one left to defeat, only the cold. His army, the Grande Armée, begins its retreat, 600,000 strong, reduced to scattered echoes along the snowbound roads. Horses collapse in silence. Muskets freeze to hands that no longer tremble. The men stop singing. They stop speaking. They simply walk, as if walking itself were the last act of defiance left to them. And Napoleon, wrapped in his cloak against a winter that will not forgive him, says almost nothing. He writes reports claiming victory, even as his soldiers starve by the thousands. Perhaps he believes the words can make it true. But the world is already watching, and the world loves nothing more than a fallen god. Lie 3. He fell because of arrogance. That's the story we're told, that his pride led him to Russia, that hubris froze his crown solid. But arrogance is the luxury of those who believe they can still choose. Napoleon had no choice. To pause was to perish. To retreat was to unravel the illusion that had kept his empire alive. He had become trapped not by pride, but by momentum, the unstoppable force of his own legend. The man who once mastered the art of timing now watched the seasons turn against him. Every step east had been a gamble, and in Russia, even the dice froze. When he returns to Paris, the cheers are thinner, the silence between them longer. Europe rises once more. Austria, Prussia, Britain. Old enemies, smelling blood. They come for him together this time, as if all of history were conspiring for one final reckoning. And so comes Lie 4. He died forgotten. Because before death, there was the fall. Waterloo. A field soaked in rain and prophecy. The dawn breaks gray and heavy, the ground a swamp of mud and blood. Across the valley, Wellington's redcoats wait in silence. The drums roll once more, slower now, as if echoing from another age. Napoleon stands among his men, watching the horizon. He is no longer the man from Toulon, nor the emperor of Austerlitz. He is something smaller, and somehow greater. A man who knows he's about to lose everything, but fights anyway. The cannons roar, smoke billows, thunder and earth blend into one. Cavalry charges vanish into fog. Gunfire cracks like the snapping of the world's spine. He sends in the guard, his last reserve, his heart made flesh. They march uphill into the storm, into death itself, refusing to break formation, even as their ranks are torn apart. When they fall, they do not run. They simply disappear into the smoke, one step at a time. And in that moment, history exhales. The impossible has finally caught him. That night, the battlefield is silent. The rain falls softly over bodies that once believed themselves immortal. Somewhere, a wounded drummer still taps his final rhythm against the mud, a sound so faint it could be mistaken for memory. Napoleon watches the darkness swallow his empire. He says little. What words remain when language itself feels too heavy? He knows the truth now. Not every victory is meant to be survived. When they send him to St. Helena, it is not exile. It is erasure, a rock in the middle of the ocean, windswept, barren, forgotten. He walks the cliffs alone, coat flapping like a banner in the salt air. The gulls cry overhead. The waves crash against the black stones like the ghosts of battles long gone. He dictates his memoirs by candlelight, rewriting his own story before others can do it for him. The words drift between confession and command, between truth and myth. Sometimes he sounds like a man trying to remember who he was. Sometimes like a god trying to forget. And so comes the final lie. Lie 5. He was the villain of history, because villains fade, and Napoleon never did. In death, he became something larger than the life he lived. Romantics painted him as the last great dreamer. Revolutionaries called him a symbol of progress. Dictators claimed his mantle. The people, always, whispered his name, as if it could still change their fate. The tyrant became a myth. The myth became a mirror. And every age since has seen itself reflected in the fire he left behind. One evening, as the sun sinks into the Atlantic, Napoleon looks toward the horizon, where the sea meets the sky in a perfect empty silence. He closes his eyes. For a moment, there is no empire, no war, no crown, only the sound of the wind moving through the grass and the faint echo of drums somewhere very far away. He smiles, because he knows now, history will never let him rest. The truth that survived the lies. The waves of St. Helena still crash against the black rock centuries later. The island hasn't changed, only the silence has grown older. Somewhere beneath that endless horizon lies the man who once ruled half the world. The soldier who redrew maps, rewrote laws, and redefined what ambition could mean. He sleeps in a tomb of stone and myth, a prisoner not of Britain, not of history, but of memory itself. Because even in death, Napoleon never stopped fighting. Not with armies, but with stories. We still argue about him, the monster, the savior, the genius, the fool. 200 years have passed, and the world remains divided between those who kneel before his brilliance and those who curse his name. And perhaps both are right, because the truth is never pure. It lives in contradiction. Napoleon was the revolution's last soldier and its first betrayer. He carried the light of liberty across Europe, and then extinguished it in the name of order. He built schools, hospitals, roads, and graves. He gave the world laws that endure to this day, and wars whose echoes have never quite faded. So how do we remember such a man? Maybe we don't. Maybe that's the lesson. History doesn't preserve truth. It preserves emotion. It keeps what moves us, what frightens us, what defines us. The rest, it buries. And in Napoleon's case, the burial was deliberate. The British painted him as a demon. The French turned him into a legend. The rest of the world learned to love the myth because it was easier than facing what it revealed, that greatness is not born of purity, but of hunger, and that the line between hero and tyrant is drawn not by deeds, but by who survives to tell the tale. Look closer, and you'll see his shadow everywhere, in the laws that govern nations, in the military academies that still study his tactics, in the leaders who dream of being remembered like him, and in the people who fear what that remembrance costs. Every time we crown a man for his genius, every time we excuse cruelty in the name of destiny, we're still walking the same path he carved through history, a path paved with brilliance, pride, and inevitability. Maybe that's why the lies endure. Because the truth about Napoleon isn't really about him at all. It's about us. Our need to believe that power can be righteous, that ambition can be tamed, that one man can hold the world in his hands without breaking it. He tried. He failed. And in that failure, he became eternal. He didn't conquer the world. He conquered the imagination.